Chapter 211. Boom. As soon as she came out of Kyle's house, there was thunder rumbling in the sky. The thunder was getting louder and louder, and the sky was wrapped in darkness. It seemed that there would be heavy rain soon. Karen Daly should have gone home, but little Karen was playing with her for a while, and then dragged her look at other things. She forgot the time when she playing, so she didn't go home until it was so late. Karen Daly wanted to take a taxi home, but Kevin Kyle insisted on sending her home. Not only did he want to send her home, but little Karen also wanted to follow them. Therefore, Karen Daly was sitting on the right at the back seat, and Kevin Kyle was sitting on the left. Little Karen and their pet Momo were sitting between them. Little Karen was very excited today. She would climb into Kevin Kyle's arms coyly, and then she would climb into Karen Daly's arms. It was as if she knew that these two were her parents. Karen Daly was a little absent-minded. She didn't know whether it was because of the weather or because she was in a hurry to get home. Her father had already called her several times and urged her to go home, but the chauffeur was driving too slowly. Karen Daly felt that she could even run faster than the car. If he kept driving at this speed, Karen Daly estimated that it would already be the next morning when she gets home. After a few more claps of thunder, it began to rain heavily. It was late at night, and given the heavy rain, there were not many vehicles around. It was very dark all around. Karen Daly had spent many dark nights running and shouting and running, shouting, as if she wanted to break through to another dimension, to find the person she had been looking for. However, no matter how hard she ran, she never could get to the destination she wanted to go to, as if there was an invisible force weighing her down. An inexplicable feeling of uneasiness suddenly came upon Karen Daly. She was a little frightened and clenched her fists to control her emotions. "Sister, don't be afraid. Daddy is here. Daddy will protect both of us," the child suddenly piped up. It was said that children may not be sensible, but in fact, they could often see things that adults could not see. Little Karen knew that her father was very happy today, and it was because of Big Karen that he was so happy. Little Karen reached out and held Karen Daly's clenched fist. In an instant, Karen Daly was no longer afraid. She looked at her and smiled. "Thank you, little Karen. I am not afraid anymore." Little Karen's soft voice sounded again in the narrow space. "Sister, please take down my phone number and call me when you get home." "Okay." Karen Daly nodded, took out her mobile phone, and heard little Karen skillfully read aloud a string of numbers. After she saved it, she heard little Karen say, "This is Daddy's number. Call Daddy when you think of me, then you can find me." "Okay." Karen Daly nodded again and looked up at Kevin Kyle, just in time to meet his gentle gaze. He nodded at her with a smile and said nothing. About half an hour later, Karen Daly finally got home. After watching the Kyle father and daughter pair drive away, she turned around and went upstairs. In the dark night, the dazzling white Bentley continued to move in the rain. In the back seat of the car, Kevin Kyle, who was tall and handsome, had his adorable little Karen sitting on his lap. And on little Karen's lap was the adorable white Pomeranian puppy. Kevin Kyle kissed little Karen's small face and said softly, "Karen, there is still some time before we will reach home. Put down Momo and sleep in Dad's arms for a while, okay?" Little Karen raised her head and patted Kevin Kyle's face. She said in a soft voice, "Daddy, I want to play with Momo for a while." "Okay, sure." In the past 3 years, Kevin Kyle had always been reluctant to refuse any of his daughter's requests. No matter where they went, he would take little Karen and Momo with him. When his Big Karen had disappeared from his life, Big Momo had also left the world too, so he wouldn't let anyone have the opportunity to hurt little Karen and little Momo. "My little sister, I really like Big Karen. Do you also like Big Karen?" Little Karen looked at little Momo and asked very seriously. "Woof, woof, 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 woof." Little Momo barked. That meant little Momo liked her too. Little Karen touched its head and kissed it. "Then Big Karen is now our big sister." TSS. All of a sudden, the car screeched to a halt. Kevin Kyle steadily held little Karen in his arms and asked in a low voice, "What is it?" The driver turned around and said, "Director Kevin, there's a bloodied man lying in our way." "Just go around him," Kevin Kyle ordered coldly. He had never meddled in other people's business. He never cared about another's life nor death. "Yes, sir." The driver started the car, turned the steering wheel to the left, and drove around the left of the boy lying on the ground. "Daddy, save that big brother," little Karen suddenly said. The street lamp's light shone on the man lying on the ground. When the car passed by him, little Karen turned her head and inadvertently saw a boy covered in blood. She was a little scared, but she still asked her father to save the man. "Karen, do you really want to save that man?" Kevin Kyle rubbed little Karen's head and asked gently. "Yes, save that big brother." She nodded her little head with an unusually firm look. "Okay, I'll listen to you," Kevin Kyle said. He kissed his daughter, glanced at the boy lying on the ground, and said to the driver, "Pick him up and send him to the hospital." The boy was only about 16 years old. He had many cuts on his body. At this time, he was still breathing. He could still be rescued. "Dad, will Big Brother be fine?" Little Karen blinked her bright eyes and looked at her father, who to her could do anything. Kevin Kyle said, "As long as Karen thinks he is fine, he will be fine." Little Karen nodded vigorously. "Then I will think the best for the big brother." Okay, Kevin Kyle replied. It was because little Karen thought the best for this big brother that the doctors at the hospital were able to perform emergency rescue and saved his life. The rain was still ongoing, which made people feel weary. After taking her medicine, Karen Daly lay down, but she couldn't fall asleep in bed. Her mind was full of little Karen's beautiful little face. She thought of little Karen's sweet smile, her soft voice, and all of her adorable expressions. She had seen children before, and she didn't know why. When she saw little Karen, she felt as if her heart was melting. Little Karen also liked her, didn't she? When she left the Kyle family, little Karen didn't want her to go. In the end, she followed her father and sent her home. When she got off the car, little Karen made a pinky promise with her and asked her to see her again in 2 days. Karen Daly agreed to little Karen's invitation without thinking and kept it in mind. Chapter 212. At the same time, Samuel Daly, who was in another room, also couldn't fall asleep. The reason why he couldn't fall asleep was because of the phone call he had received that afternoon. If he wanted to meet that person head-on with his current strength, he would definitely lose. The only thing he could hold that person back with was the secret. It was his only bargaining chip. And as for that Kevin Kyle, he was calm. Samuel did not believe that such a smart person like Kevin Kyle would not be able to guess the real purpose of his return with Karen Daly. If Kevin Kyle had already guessed his purpose but did not send anyone to find him, it only showed that Kevin Kyle had other plans in mind and was not willing to be controlled by Samuel Daly. The old head of the Kyle family was very concerned about Samuel Daly because of this matter. The old man wished he could get rid of Samuel as soon as possible. Because of what happened to Karen Daly, Kevin Kyle hated Samuel Daly to the core. These two people were now under Samuel's control because he was withholding the most important person and a thing for them. Once these two things were out of his control, Samuel knew he might be destroyed by them and disappear without a trace. Therefore, he could no longer sit still and wait for death. He needed more connections, and he needed to build some of his own strength to fight against the Kyle family. And the last people he could think of are the two people who were doing well in Beaufort City. They were good partners that he could choose to cooperate with. Thunder struck the whole night, and rain fell endlessly. That night, Karen Daly didn't fall asleep at all. As soon as she closed her eyes, she would see horrible scenes, some that she wasn't familiar with but felt real. Perhaps little Karen had left a deep impression on her. She even dreamt that she had a child. It was just that she tried her best to remember where the child went, but she couldn't think of anything. She would only be swallowed up by endless darkness again and again. Since she couldn't fall asleep, Karen Daly didn't want to continue trying. She got up early to tidy up and tried to go to the office earlier. She arrived at the office very early. When she was waiting for the elevator, there was no one next to her. Just as the elevator door was about to close, a woman's voice came. "Please wait." Karen Daly immediately pressed the open button. The elevator opened and the woman squeezed in. Her eyes fell on Karen Daly's face and looked at it for a long time. Finally, she suddenly hugged Karen Daly. "Silly girl, we have been looking for you for so many years, and you are finally back. When I thought I will never see you again, you finally came back." "Madam, you may have mistaken me for someone else. I don't know you." Karen Daly wanted to push away the woman who was holding her, but the woman held her too tightly. She couldn't push her away at all. "Your name is Karen Daly, and my name is Faye Reed. We are high school classmates, college classmates even. We came to Chatterton Town from Beaufort City together. We opened a studio together and did a lot of things together," Faye Reed said cheerfully. Faye Reed wouldn't be able to finish talking about the things that happened between them, even if she had a full day to do so. She was so ecstatic and only was able to tell Karen some important things. 3 years ago, after Faye Reed had been burned by the fire, Kevin Kyle hired the best doctor to help her with the treatment. The surgery was also successful. There was almost no trace of burns on her face, only there were several obvious scars on her body. Karen Daly had disappeared. During these years, Faye Reed was still managing the studio that she and Karen Daly founded. With the help of Kevin Kyle, the size of the studio was now more than 10 times larger than before. The previous day, Faye Reed accidentally saw a photo. When she saw the photo, she was shocked. Karen Daly was in the photo. She immediately called her friend, who posted the photos to confirm whether there was such a person. After getting a positive answer, she was so happy that she almost went crazy. She once thought that Karen Daly had really left this world, and because Karen had gotten into an accident on the way to the hospital when Faye was burnt, she had felt guilty all this while. If she had been careful enough to not have gotten into that burn accident, Karen Daly would not have gone to the hospital. If Karen Daly had not gone to the hospital, there would not be a car accident, let alone what happened after. "Faye Reed?" Karen Daly repeated the name and shook her head apologetically. "Sorry, I really don't know you. I grew up in Milan. This is the first time I've returned to Chatterton. I think you might have mistaken me for someone else." "How could it be my mistake?" Faye Reed shook Karen Daly in her arms and asked, "You are Karen Daly, aren't you?" Karen Daly nodded. "I am Karen Daly, but there are many people with the same name in the world." Faye Reed said, Yes, there are many people with the same name. But how many people with the same name and the same face could you find? Karen Daly did not understand what Fay Reed was trying to say, so she looked at Fay Reed doubtfully. Fay Reed added, Karen Daly, we've known each other for more than 10 years. We are best friends in the world. Do you think I'll mistake you for someone else? Seeing that Fay Reed was so serious and didn't seem to be lying, Karen Daly thought about it seriously, but she still couldn't think of any memory of Fay Reed. Karen Daly shook her head and said, Miss Reed, I'm sorry. I really don't remember anything about what you said at all. You are Karen Daly, but you don't know me? Fay Reed also realized that something was wrong. My name is Karen Daly, but I really don't know you, Karen replied. This was the second time that Karen Daly had been mistaken as someone, and she began to have some doubts in her heart. Her father has been hiding something that he didn't want to tell her. What happened 3 years ago? Fay Reed was not willing to believe this, so she said, Karen, do you really not remember me at all? Or did something happen to you, so you don't want to admit it? Fay Reed didn't think it was possible. Even if Karen Daly didn't want to admit that she knew the people from her past, it could be possible for someone else. It would definitely not be her. She was Karen Daly's best friend. There were no secrets between them. Suddenly, Fay Reed thought of the words Karen Daly said a few years ago. Karen's expression on that day scared her. Karen Daly had once told her that someone had told her that she did not deserve to stand by Kevin Kyle's side, that she was born inferior, and that she was asked to leave Kevin Kyle. Karen Daly went missing for 3 years and she didn't recognize Fay when she returned. Were these orchestrated by someone else? Fay Reed also didn't know much about the Kyle family. Although she had seen Kevin Kyle several times, she wasn't very close to him. However, Fay Reed could tell that Kevin Kyle was a good man who really cared for his wife. The person who hurt Karen Daly must not have been Kevin Kyle, but someone else. Fay Reed said, Karen Daly, whether you remember me or not, I just want to tell you that no matter what happens, you will always be the friend I value the most. Chapter 213. It had only been a few days since she arrived in Chatterton town. Karen Daly felt that she came to know more people than she ever did in the past 2 or 3 years. And everyone she met was so enthusiastic to her, as if they were all very familiar with her, like friends who hadn't seen each other for many years. Take Fay Reed, whom she met this morning, for example. She cried so hard when she saw Karen, hugging her and crying until her nose was runny. She cried for a long time before she stopped crying. People who didn't know them would think that Karen had been scolding Fay. She was confused, but looking at Fay Reed's worried look, Karen Daly also felt very warm in her heart. Kevin Kyle? Fay Reed? Mia Kyle? Little Karen? Karen Daly chanted these names several times in her heart. After thinking for a while, she still couldn't remember that there was such a group of people who had appeared in her memory. Karen Daly shook her head, feeling helpless and amused. Apart from that, she also had some faint worries about the lost memories. Her father had never said anything about her past, but it was not to protect her from harm, then why would he hide those memories? Buzz. While Karen Daly was deep in thought, the phone on her desk started to buzz. She picked it up and saw the 2 words, Little Karen, on the phone screen. Thinking of Little Karen, the corners of Karen Daly's mouth couldn't help rising slightly. She smiled and answered the phone. Is it Little Karen? Yes, it's me. Little Karen's soft voice came from the other end of the phone. Just listening to her voice, one could imagine how cute she was when she spoke. Sister, I would like to treat you to a meal. Little Karen, I'm at work. Can I have a meal with you some other day? Karen Daly couldn't bear to refuse such an adorable little baby girl. But she still had to attend to her work today. How could she not refuse? But, I'm already waiting for you downstairs. Little Karen's soft voice was tinged with a hint of anxiety, as if she would cry if Karen Daly refused. What do you mean? I'm downstairs your building. Little Karen replied. Karen Daly looked at the time and it was almost 12 o'clock. It was time for lunch, so she said, Little Karen, wait for me for a while. I'll come down to find you. When she went downstairs, Karen Daly saw Little Karen at first glance. The little girl was running around outside the building entrance. She looked very cute with her fairy-like eyes looking around. Her father was not beside her. There was only a woman following her. As little Karen walked, the woman would walk beside her, worried that she would fall and knock something. Sister. Little Karen also saw Karen Daly approach her. She smiled and threw herself into Karen Daly's arms, kissed Karen Daly's face with her tender little mouth, and said, I'll kiss you for free. Karen Daly picked up little Karen and kissed her tender face. I'll kiss you for free too. Little Karen held Karen Daly's face and suddenly asked in a serious tone, Big Karen, how much would it cost for you to kiss Daddy? Karen Daly. Little Karen said, Sister, you have to ask for a lot of money. Haha. Little Karen felt that she was the cutest child in the world. She didn't ask Big Karen for any money. But if Big Karen kissed her father, he must pay a lot of money. But it didn't matter. Her father had money. Karen Daly smiled and didn't respond. Who would treat her seriously? She's only a child. Little Karen invited Karen Daly to have lunch at a restaurant named Baiha Restaurant not far from the company. They had booked the private room 1808, the room that had created many memories. Only when Karen Daly pushed open the restaurant door did she realize that little Karen's father was also there. Kevin Kyle was on the phone. When he saw them coming, he smiled apologetically and hung up after a few words. Kevin Kyle pulled out a chair and invited Karen Daly to take a seat. Then he put little Karen on her baby stool and said, "Little Karen has been clamoring to have lunch with you. I really can't do anything about her, so I had to ask someone to take her to you. Miss Daly, do you mind if little Karen disturbs you?" Not at all. Karen Daly immediately shook her head. In fact, she liked to be with little Karen, but she didn't expect that little Karen's father to be there, which made her a little embarrassed. Karen Daly's embarrassment somewhat upset Kevin Kyle, but he still kept smiling and saying in a low voice, "Little Karen's mother has been away from her since she was a child. I always wanted to be kind to her, so I unconsciously spoiled her so recklessly. It's not a bad thing for a father to dote on his daughter. Besides, I think little Karen is very cute and not spoiled at all." Karen Daly touched little Karen's head. "She's a lovely and sensible child." Karen Daly did not notice how distressed her tone was when she heard Kevin Kyle say little Karen was willful. She didn't have a mother. Although she had her father to help her in the past 3 years, sometimes she still hoped that she could have a mother by her side. Even as an adult, she yearned for a mother's love, let alone a cute, childlike little Karen. Hearing Kevin Kyle's words, Karen realized that little Karen's mother should still be alive, but just that he didn't know where she had gone. She really didn't know what was going on in that mother's mind. With such a good husband and daughter, what would she be doing running around? Yes, Karen is the loveliest. Daddy is not good. Little Karen naturally didn't know what Karen Daly was thinking, but when she heard Karen Daly praising her, she was very proud. She smiled at Karen Daly as if Karen Daly and she were a family, and Kevin Kyle was just someone else. Yes, my Karen is the most adorable one in our family. Daddy is not good at all. Kevin Kyle got up and kissed little Karen on the face. Since you're the most obedient, you cannot cry if Daddy goes out to work, all right? When little Karen heard this, she looked at Kevin Kyle in shock. Ah, I've been tricked by my father, she thought to herself as she became upset. What should she do? She really wanted to know how to do magic and make her father disappear from her eyes for a while. Kevin Kyle scratched little Karen's little nose, looked at Karen Daly, and said softly, "There is still something for me to attend to at my company. I have to go on a business trip for a few days. I have to go first. You two can take your time." The dishes. Since the dishes were all on the table, why didn't he eat them before he leaves? Karen Daly wanted to say that, but when she thought of how he was just a stranger to her, she swallowed back her words and nodded with a smile. Kevin Kyle looked at her smiling face and his breath was slightly stagnant. He quickly turned his head and leaned over to kiss little Karen's face as a farewell. "Daddy," kissed little Karen, "you have to kiss big Karen too." Little Karen blinked her eyes and said softly. As soon as little Karen finished, Kevin Kyle and Karen Daly almost looked at each other at the same time. In Kevin Kyle's eyes, Karen Daly saw a light that shouldn't appear. It was so sharp that it was blinding. She immediately turned her head away and quickly blinked, pretending that she didn't see anything. Seeing that Karen Daly turned her head away, Kevin Kyle felt a little distressed. They were at the same Baiha restaurant, in the same private room. She was still sitting in the seat she used to sit in, but she would not blush at him like she used to. But it didn't matter. Everything would go back to the way it was eventually. Chapter 214. After Kevin Kyle left, little Karen took 2 bites of the strawberry pie and wiped her face with her hand. For an instant, her face was full of cream, making her look like a little clown. She smiled at Karen Daly and urged her politely. "Sister, you eat." "Little Karen, eat slowly." Karen Daly was hungry as well, but she was busy attending to the little girl and had not taken a bite. She took a tissue and cleaned little Karen's face. She only met little Karen twice, but she had already gained her father's trust. He believed Karen Daly enough and handed little Karen over to her. What if she were a wrong person with evil intentions? "Sister, Daddy is on a business trip. Why don't you go home with me?" Karen Daly had just wiped little Karen's face clean, but she stained her face with cream accidentally, again. Karen Daly cleaned little Karen's face and said, "I have work to do in the afternoon. You should go home first after eating. I'll call you at night." But I want you to accompany me." Little Karen twitched her mouth and said with a sense of grievance. She didn't forget her father's instructions. Her father had told her to trick Big Karen to follow her back home. She even used her trump card. She didn't believe that Big Sister Karen wouldn't take the bait. But Karen Daly wanted to go to work, but she couldn't bear to refuse such an adorable little baby girl. For a moment, she didn't know whether she would agree or not. "If I follow you to work, then you will accompany me home." At the last minute, little Karen proposed a solution. Little Karen put on an expression that plainly said, "I will cry if you refuse." Her big watery eyes blinked, which were more irresistible than the sharpness in her father's eyes. Karen Daly sighed silently. What's wrong with this father and daughter duo? She thought. Sure, let's do that. Her heart softened, so she agreed to the little girl's demands. In any case, Karen Daly had not much to do home with Samuel Daly, and Kevin Kyle was not at home. It should not be a big deal to accompany this little baby girl, shouldn't it? After I received your phone call, I booked a flight back to Chatterton Town immediately. Now you tell me that Karen Daly has forgotten all the things in the past, and I can't talk to her? After listening to Kevin Kyle's words, George Ken roared in fury. He was even more emotional than when he heard the news of Karen Daly's death 3 years ago. 3 years ago, he had just reconnected with his long-lost sister, but suddenly received the news of her untimely death. He rushed to Chatterton Town as soon as he received the news, but before he could see his sister for the last time, the Kyle family had cremated her. No one could accept this kind of thing. At that time, George Ken had gotten into a fight with Kevin Kyle. He was actually no match for Kevin Kyle at all, but Kevin Kyle did not really fight back, and he was bruised by George all over. That had been the first time Kevin Kyle had been beaten to this state. In actual fact, George Ken knew very well that Kevin Kyle was more devastated than anyone else about the fact that Karen Daly had disappeared from this life. In the past 3 years, he had been living a life that was worse than death. But Kevin Kyle firmly told George that Karen Daly was still alive and that he would send many people to look for her. But the world was so big, and without a clue, it was not easy to find a person. His parents had died early, so Karen Daly was the closest person in the world to George Ken. When he returned to Beaufort City, he closed the studio in Beaufort City. He then started to search in Beaufort City, and then all over the country, then went abroad to look for her. He went to all the places where Karen Daly might have gone. In the past 3 years, he had gone to many places and asked a lot of people, but there was no news about Karen Daly. But George Ken didn't give up, as Kevin Kyle didn't give up looking for Karen Daly. As Karen Daly's biological brother, it was impossible for him to give up looking for Karen Daly. Just as he got the news that Karen Daly might be in Milan, he received a call from Kevin Kyle saying that Karen Daly was back. Karen Daly had returned, but she forgot her past memories. That was to say, they were all strangers to her. George Ken's anger was ignited when he heard this news all of a sudden, but he soon calmed down. After calming down, George Ken felt a little embarrassed. Kevin Kyle definitely would not want Karen Daly to forget everything about the past too. The reason why George Ken lost his temper was that he wanted to vent his anger, which had been put up in his heart for 3 years. He needed an emotional outlet for all this distress. However, if he could vent his anger on Kevin Kyle, who could Kevin Kyle vent his anger on? Kevin Kyle could only swallow all these grievances in his heart, and he had to bear all the consequences on his own. After being scolded by George Ken, Kevin Kyle still remained calm and said calmly, "Little Karen will take Karen Daly home tonight. You can go to my house and see her. Find a way to talk to her." George Ken raised his eyebrows. "Aren't you going home too?" Kevin Kyle said. "I'm going on a business trip." George Ken gave him a look of surprise. "I didn't expect that Rovio's Leo Kyle would tell a lie." Kevin Kyle said, "I'm no longer in Karen Daly's memory, and I don't know what I can do, so it's better for you, an esteemed psychiatrist, to talk to her." Kevin Kyle was very clear that if he were at home, Karen Daly would never go home with little Karen. He was taking advantage of Karen Daly's pity for little Karen, so that little Karen could spend more time with Karen Daly alone. Blood was thicker than water. This child was hers. Perhaps, if Karen Daly stayed around little Karen a little longer, one day, Karen Daly's memory of little Karen would be back. Kevin Kyle couldn't trust any other psychiatrists, so after learning that Karen Daly had lost her past memories, Kevin Kyle first thought of Karen Daly's biological brother, George Ken, and asked him to return from abroad. George Ken then said, "Give me your Ferrari and let me drive it for 2 days so that I can look cool." George Ken was such a person. He seemed to be carefree about everything, but he was very careful with things in his heart. Karen Daly was back. As long as she was back, the things from the past were really not so important. A man like Kevin Kyle, who was so excellent and had such good qualities, it's impossible for Karen Daly not to like him. As for George and little Karen, they were all people who had blood ties with Karen Daly. Even if Karen Daly couldn't remember them, they were Karen Daly's closest family. After thinking through these things, George Ken was now in the mood to crack a joke. He even started to think of showing off by borrowing Kevin Kyle's car. With a Ferrari driving around in Chatterton Town, he could get all kinds of women he wanted. Kevin Kyle said, "As long as Karen Daly gets better, the car is yours. I'm so lucky to have a brother-in-law like you." George Ken slapped Kevin Kyle's shoulder jokingly and said, "A sister for a Ferrari sports car. If I had known earlier, I would have asked my parents to have a few more daughters. I can just depend on my brother-in-law to live a luxurious life." Kevin Kyle gave him a cold look. George Ken shut up immediately. Kevin Kyle was worried about Karen Daly at the moment. He had joked too much with him, so George Ken stopped. George Ken had been manipulated by Kevin Kyle more than once, so he was all too clear about Kevin Kyle's personality. Chapter 215. George Ken had gone to Secret Garden for the first time when Karen Daly was pregnant 3 years ago. At that time, Karen Daly was very wary of him. Later, after Karen Daly disappeared, he came to see little Karen several times. Although little Karen was just a little girl at 3 years old, many children could not compare to her in terms of intelligence. She was very mature for her age. However, there was a reason for little Karen being so smart. Little Karen's father, the chief of Rovio, was the man who had once skipped several grades in school, but till now, no one had broken his record. As for little Karen's mother, when Karen Daly was at school, if she was in second place, no one would dare to claim first place. Karen was also offered a place at the best university in Beaufort City. Most importantly, George Ken felt that his niece was so smart because she had an extremely nimble-minded uncle. People always say that nieces are like their uncles. He felt that little Karen was the most similar to him in terms of intelligence and mindset. They could understand a person's character at a glance. He had not stepped into this place for months. It was different from his memory, but also a little similar. It seemed that he felt a little warmer than the last time he had come. Perhaps it was not the place that had changed, but that the person they had been looking for 3 years was now in the house. The real owner of this place had come back. George Ken was a frequent visitor to the Kyle family. Without asking the servant to lead the way, he went to the living room on his own. Before he entered the house, he heard little Karen's soft voice. "Sister, apart from Daddy, my favorite person is you. Am I your favorite person apart from Daddy?" "Yeah, my favorite person is also Daddy, and also our little Karen." Of course, Karen Daly was talking about her own father. George Ken heard her voice. Even though he hadn't heard it for 3 years, he could immediately recognize it. It could be no one else but Karen Daly. George Ken entered the house and saw Karen Daly kneeling on the ground with little Karen. He didn't know what the two of them were playing with, but they were very focused on their game and did not notice him. Karen Daly's words resonated differently into little Karen's ears. Little Karen felt that her sister's favorite person was her father, then herself. However, she felt that she was much cuter and more adorable than her father. Shouldn't this sister like her the most? Could it be because when her father left today, he said that she would cry and Big Karen had hurt him? Perhaps Big Karen did not like her? Little Karen thought. However, even if she cried, she would still look very beautiful. Seeing the little girl look upset and was about to cry, Karen Daly felt funny and distressed. She couldn't help but touch the tip of the little girl's nose and say, "Little Karen, why aren't you happy?" "Sister, why don't you like Karen the most? Daddy is not as cute as me." Little Karen blinked her eyes, and tears of grievance swirled in her eyes. Knowing that little Karen had misunderstood, Karen Daly wanted to explain, but thinking about it again, even if she explained, little Karen might not be able to understand. She held little Karen in her arms and rubbed little Karen's pink face. "I like you the most. I won't like others anymore." Hearing this answer, little Karen smiled with satisfaction. "Okay, I like you the most, and then Daddy." "Karen, don't you like your uncle?" When they were talking happily, a male voice suddenly appeared. Karen Daly and little Karen turned back at the same time. Little Karen immediately ran up, opened her small arms and shouted, "Uncle, hug me." George Ken walked over and hugged little Karen in his arms. He pinched her cheek and said, "Karen, don't you miss me at all?" Karen Daly didn't know this man. When she heard little Karen call him uncle, she knew this man was from little Karen's family, so she couldn't help but stare at him. George Ken noticed her eyes and replied with a polite smile. "Miss Daly, nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you," Karen Daly nodded. She thought to herself, "This is the first time I've met this person. How did he know my surname, Daly?" "Before I came here, I was on the phone with little Karen's father. He said little Karen invited an important guest home, that is why I know your name." George Ken saw through Karen Daly's mind at a glance. "Karen Daly, I'm George Ken," George Ken said. "I'm Karen's half-brother. We have the same father, but different mothers." Karen Daly nodded and did not continue. She just felt that it was strange that everyone she saw recently all told her something very personal about themselves. To be honest, Karen Daly didn't care about the relationship between George Ken and little Karen's mother at all. The reason why she came to the Kyle mansion was that she just liked being with little Karen and had no other purpose. "Miss Daly, don't think too much of it. I like it. And little Karen is very good at looking at a person's character. Anyone she likes must be a very good person." After a few simple words with Karen Daly, with George Ken's years of experience, he was sure that Karen Daly had really lost all memories of the past. It was definitely not a disguise. "Sister, you are a good person. I like it very much." Little Karen opened her arms towards Karen Daly. "I like your hug. Little Karen, you two haven't had dinner yet, right? Shall I have dinner with you?" George Ken passed little Karen back to Karen Daly and walked to the dining room. "Aunt Kim, please prepare food for us." Karen Daly caught little Karen and was stunned for a while. It was the same when she saw Mia Kyle 2 days ago. They all passed little Karen to her, as if she was the closest person to little Karen. At the dinner table, George Ken did not ask Karen Daly any special questions. He just chatted casually for a while, but it was enough for him. After the meal, George Ken left. He said that he was going out to hang out with his friends, but in fact, he was going to report the situation to Kevin Kyle. After having Big Karen around, the servants at home were not wanted by Little Karen anymore. After dinner, Little Karen took Karen Daly upstairs and wanted Big Karen to sleep with her. The servants had prepared a guest room for Karen Daly, but she had been led away by Little Karen, and Karen Daly couldn't bear to refuse her. She thought that Little Karen should have her own room, so it didn't matter for her to be with Little Karen. She didn't expect that Little Karen would pull her into the master bedroom. Karen Daly took a quick look and saw the desk near the balcony in the hall. There were a few books on the bookshelf and a painting rack beside the desk. It seemed to look familiar to her. Karen Daly grabbed Little Karen and said softly, "Little Karen, this is Daddy's room. Can we go to your room? I sleep with Daddy, and you sleep with me. Let's sleep together." Little Karen had a separate room, but she had never slept there. To her, her father's room was her room.